are again. You know, I'm going to take you back to a time when Bozo the Clown. Do you remember Bozo?
Yes.
Yes. And one thing he used to do, and I always would watch it to see maybe if he could see me. He would put this little round thing and he'd say, I see Jeff has a birthday today, and I see Johnny, he has, and he never said Grady. I always wondered how he could look through a camera and see everyone. So here we are. We've got Ready Wrestle 2. Now, I have doubled the congregation I had last time. And I would encourage, when we get back together, that we try doubling by inviting others to come. Richard, I have a question for you right on camera. Are we going to get that piece for the FM station?
They just emailed. There's 18 going to be shipped out today and 200 more on Friday.
We may get that piece that we're missing to broadcast. Our goal is to have Easter parking lot service. And so I would ask you to add that to your prayer list as we look at our scripture today. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for this time. Thank you for the ability to broadcast and to communicate your love and your grace. And we ask your blessing on today's message, that it will stir us and cause us to pray all the more. Amen. If you were with me last time, we looked at Ready Wrestle 1. Now, Carolee's ready for this one. There were 2 lessons that we were to learn. They are...
Pray without ceasing and never lose heart.
Never lose heart. Never lose heart. And that was round 1. We looked at the widow, the judge. We looked at the blind men. We had lots of references throughout Scripture. And that was found in Luke chapter 18. We're going back to Luke 11 today, 1 through 13. Here is how verse 1 goes. It happened that while Jesus was praying in a certain place, after he had finished, one of his disciples said to him, Lord, teach us to pray, just as John also taught his disciples to pray. Now we know that one of the disciples, Andrew, was a disciple of John the Baptist. It could very well have been Andrew who told the rest of the disciples, this is what John said, how we should pray. And so they are asking for the very first time for Jesus to teach them something. And they ask, teach us to pray. Many times Jesus would go off and pray by himself. And that's found in Luke chapter 5, verse 16. The disciples found Jesus at one of those times, and I want you to catch this. They waited. In the Jewish culture, there was no such thing as a silent prayer. No one would bow their head and pray in silence. It was always out loud. And the disciples found Jesus, and it says they waited until he finished. It's quite a moment. This is the Trinity talking to each other. This is a time that Jesus is praying, and the disciples are watching him pray. I wonder what that was like. I wonder what Jesus' prayer was when they were waiting. Did he say to his father, well, you know Pete, and how he is troubled so much, and how he gets in trouble with some of the things he says, And then he goes through all the disciples' names. Is that what they were waiting and listening? It's an incredible thing. A incredible thought that Jesus was praying and they were listening in on his prayer. You know, it says that in Hebrews 7:25 that Jesus is still our advocate. That means that he's still praying for us. We are looking at Luke chapter 11. And this is we call it the Lord's Prayer, but actually it's the disciples' prayer. They ask him, teach us to pray. Now, in other times, Jesus had said, this is how I want you to pray. I want you to go in your closet, and I want you to pray without anyone else hearing. And in secret, God will answer you. And now we see Jesus praying, the disciples watching, and now they want him to teach us to pray. Well, Jesus says in other places, don't use repetition. Don't just put filler in your prayers. And so he gives this brief prayer, and it's shorter than the one on the Sermon on the Mount. And he is aware of their sins, and they need to be forgiven out of gratefulness and to forgive others. And then he says something very interesting. Well, I mean, everything he says is interesting, isn't that right? But this one, lead us not into temptation. What? Jesus teaches us to remind God not to lead us into temptation. C.S. Lewis cleared that up for me. He said in all our petitionary prayers, we ought to add that to every prayer we make. Lead us not into temptation. Meaning that if anything I have said today, any prayer that I have made today that would cause me to fall into temptation and lead me off in the wrong path, don't give it to me. It's a good thing for us to remember. But today I want you to see that prayer and temptation go hand in hand. Visually, I want you to see what that looks like. And it's found in Genesis chapter 4. And it's talking about anger that Cain had because his sacrifice was not accepted. And so he's angry at God. Genesis 4:7 says, if you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it. Jesus said, lead us not into temptation. So whenever we are entering into prayer, we are opening up a door that temptation is crouching beside us. If we do well, prayer will lift our countenance. If not, we will allow sin to take us over. Jesus ends the prayer with adding this petition of not entering into temptation. There seems to be a connection between prayer and temptation. In Luke 4, it tells us that Satan visited and tempted Jesus while he was fasting and praying. Luke says that Jesus was full of the Holy Spirit when he began his prayer and fasting time. Jesus was not overcome during his prayer time. He was tempted in all ways as we are, and yet without sinning. And so we are to master it like Jesus by being vigilant and praying, lead us not into temptation and deliver us from the evil one. So anytime we pray, we not only enter into the presence of God, but also temptation is crouching right next to us. I believe one of the biggest temptations is to lose heart. I have a brother-in-law that his brother committed suicide. And he blamed God, and he still blames God, and he will not forgive God. Anytime we pray, there's a temptation to lose heart. And so, Carolee, what are those two lessons that we learned last time?
Pray without ceasing and never lose heart.
And never lose heart. Pray without ceasing and never lose heart. Jesus ends his short prayer and goes on to tell another story about prayer. But before we get to that, I want you to see that Jesus had his own wrestling match with God, the Father. I didn't have time to let you in on the garden where Jesus wrestled. Just as the widow pleaded with the judge, Jesus pleads with God the Father. And Jesus wrestled, and the disciples slept. This wrestling match even drew blood. Do you remember how Luke described that Jesus was under such intense stress that blood poured out of his pores? He, being a doctor, knew that most people can't stay conscious. They will faint before that happens. And so we see that the wrestling match was real and intense. Jesus prayed for the cup, death on the cross, to be removed. It was not a lack of faith that his answer was denied. There's very poor theology that is being spread, and it's infected many in the church. And that is, if we have enough faith, if we pray according to a certain formula, we will always have our prayers answered in the positive. We know that Jesus did not lack faith. He did not have a time where I don't have faith that God can remove this cup. No, he had plenty of faith. And yet, he still didn't get a positive answer. There's something else happening. Temptation was very strong in the garden that night. Remember, prayer and temptation seem to go together. Look at Luke 22. Luke's description of the Garden of Gethsemane. In Luke 22, verse 40, when he arrived at the place, he said to them, "Pray that you might not enter into temptation." Jesus repeated the same message as he found them sleeping. And in verse 46 he said, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you might not enter into temptation." You see, temptation and prayer seem to go together. We often don't think of that. Jesus was aware that there was temptation all around, and he wasn't just talking about staying awake. He faced it in the wilderness, and now it was very strong that night, and he knew it, and he asked his disciples, "Pray that you do not enter into temptation." You see, Jesus had his own battle, but the disciples had theirs. They said that they wanted to learn how to pray. They wanted to know, how do you pray? Teach us how to pray. But they did not realize the danger that awaits anyone who prays. One more side note. Jesus gave the example of the Pharisee in Luke 18 who went into the temple and how glad he was, not like other people who were sinners. We are tempted, even in prayer, to think that we're better than others because we pray. Oh, yes, Lord, lead us not into temptation. Help us as we pray. Jesus entered the Garden of Gethsemane and cautioned them to pray because temptation was as thick as a fog around them. And they did not take him seriously, and they slept. There's something else we need to see in the garden. You know, Jesus repeatedly said, I must go to Jerusalem and I will be taken in and I will end up dying, but in 3 days I will come back again. So what happened in the garden? Did Jesus somehow forget all of what he had predicted before? It sounds like Jesus understood what his mission was. And yet now he has this petitionary prayer, remove the cup, which was his pending death on the cross. So what happened? You see, temptation is present when we pray. This temptation has to do with cover-up. We try to make our prayers sound religious. We repeat words and phrases that we've learned from others. But these words are not from our heart. They're just fillers. This is not how Jesus prayed. You see, if we're upset with God, we need to say it out loud to him in prayer. We are to pray without ceasing and not with repetitive words to flower up our prayers. Pray what is on our heart. And that's exactly what Jesus prayed in the garden. You see, Jesus bore his heart to his Father that night and took this sorrow to the cross where he felt forgotten. Story of Abraham and Isaac, where he took Isaac up on the mountaintop and was about ready to sacrifice him. He was stopped. And the commentary of that event said, God now knows what is on his heart. It is our heart that reveals and is revealed during wrestling matches. We are confronted with temptation during our prayers when it is just routine. We avoid examining our hearts. We openly complain to others, and then we go to God in prayer and we flower it up like nothing is wrong. What God wants is our heart. The temptation is not to give it to him. Not to be honest. Paul was confronted with his own temptation along with a thorn from Satan. His thorn was not removed, and he did not give into temptation of losing his heart. Paul found a new insight about weakness and the sweetness of the Spirit. You see, Jesus had angels who comforted him in the garden, but they did not deliver him. In both cases, Paul and Jesus were comforted after the wrestling match. So there are times when God is not moved by our prayers. However, there's a reason behind the denial. But that's not our lesson today. Our lesson is found back in Luke 11, and Jesus tells the disciples they are dealing with a personality. He is our Father who knows how to give good gifts. Luke 11:13. Let's see now at the story that Jesus gave his disciples when they asked him to teach them to pray. Luke 11:5-10. And then he said to them, suppose one of you has a friend and goes to him at midnight and says to him, friend, lend me 3 loaves. For a friend of mine has come to me from a journey, and I have nothing to set before him. And from inside he answers and says, do not bother me. The door has already been shut. My children and I are in bed. I cannot give up and give you anything. I tell you, even though he will not get up and give him anything because he is his friend, yet because of his persistence, he will get up and give him as much as he needs. And so I ask to you, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be open. So what's the moral of this story? Instead of a mean judge, we have a friend trying to get another friend to respond. We don't have the same contrast from a widow and an all-powerful judge who's not in the story. The problem was timing. The friend's timing was off. The friend is coming at an inconvenient time. The first friend is a poor planner. He didn't think ahead and stock up in case of an emergency. Do you have friends like that? You're never borrowing from them, but they're always borrowing from you? Maybe not for long if it becomes a habit. Friend or no friend, it is late. Midnight is not a good time for anything. And friend or foe, in this parable, we have 2 friends, one on the inside of the house and the other knocking. Before we go any further, I need to ask you a clarifying question. Where do you put God? Is God on the inside? Is he represented as the friend on the inside? Or is he on the outside? I stand at the door and knock. Where do you put God? I think most likely we put God in the house. Just as the parable in Luke 18 uses the judge, we now have a friend, but there is a locked door between us. We also will explore further the idea that God is portrayed as a grumpy judge or a friend who's unwilling to get out of bed without constant pounding. But that comes later. The first parable about prayer in Luke 18 ended with Jesus wondering, will I find any faith? In today's parable, in Luke 11, is also connected with prayer, but does not mention speed. These are 2 friends. And let's look further into this parable and see what Jesus wants us to learn about prayer. We can identify with a friend who doesn't plan well. We know what it's like to run out of money before the paycheck comes. We all have experienced a time of need. But now we enter into the irony. The desperate know how to pray. Need seems to be the key to prayer. The person who has no need typically doesn't even pray. Why should he? It is when we are in need of something that prayer really begins. Both the widow and the friend have needs, and they come seeking help. We are needy people, and the Lord knows it. It even says the Lord knows our needs. It's not a put down. It is actually both a blessing and a curse. We have a need, therefore we come and we're willing to wrestle with God. If we have no need, that's okay. Let someone else get what we need. Both stories have a hesitation before the answer arrives. This story shows us two friends, and we know it is like to ask something, even from a friend, when they are tired. But friends inconvenience friends. There's a little saying, this is a prison story. A little saying, go to prison and find out who your friends are. Those who are true and loyal will come and visit. They might even send money. They will send cards on their birthday. They will remember them at Christmas. Those are the friends, but there are many friends who fade away when they go to prison. Prison is an inconvenience, even between friends. In Luke chapter 11, the friend on the inside, which we have identified as God, sounds like he's being inconvenienced by his own friend. Remember, Jesus is the one telling this story and has connected it to prayer. In our prayer life, I am sure we have felt like we're pounding on a locked door. Hopefully, we have not heard the voice inside say, "Hey, don't bother me." But there are times in praying we may wonder why we keep knocking if there's no results. You know, let that sink in for a moment. Don't bother me. The door is shut. My children and I are in bed. I cannot get up and give you anything. You know, you may want me to clean it up and give you some kind of formula that, we knock once, we get what we want, we go our way. I can't do that. Jesus is trying to teach his disciples. He's trying to teach us how to pray. The problem is, if we heard a voice of God say, "Don't bother me," I think the majority of us would walk away. God's will be done. That we cannot change God's mind with our prayer. He is with his family and the door is locked. But I believe Jesus wants us to pray and not lose heart. And there's a lesson to be learned about persistence that is found both in this parable about prayer and the other one we looked at. You know, it's kind of like this. Don't give up and toughen up. Keep knocking. Keep asking. Don't lose heart. Go with me now to another story found in Mark chapter 7, 24 through 30. Jesus got up and went away from there to a region of Tyre and Sidon. And when he had entered a house, he wanted no one to know of it, yet he could not escape notice. But after hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of the Syrophoenician race. She kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He was saying to her, "Let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she answered and said to him, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "Because of this answer, go, the demon has gone out of your daughter." And going back to her home, she found the child laying on the bed and the demon having left. Wait a minute, did Jesus just call somebody a dog? What's up with that? Don't bother me. My children are in here. They're all in bed. I'm not getting up. I think Jesus wants us to toughen up. If you were with Jesus in those days, they thought of Gentiles as less than human. Jesus was trying to be alone while he was visiting Tyre and Sidon. I like how the King James Version puts it. It says, he could not be hid. Isn't that amazing? Jesus cannot be hid. I find it quite ironic that the inmates who were Muslim and Buddhists and Wiccan even would use Jesus' name in vain and cuss. You see, Jesus can't be hid. It's on the lips of so many. A woman who was Greek or Gentile, as many of the versions interpret it, found where Jesus was staying. Boldly she approaches, interrupts him. She kept asking him. You remember what Jesus said about prayer? Keep on asking. She was like the widow or the friend. We may have walked away. Jesus called me a dog. I'm never going to worship him. Don't bother me. We're gone. I knew that's what kind of God he was. You see, she was desperate, and you know by now, the desperate know how to pray. Just as the friend heard inside the house that he was with his children, the woman heard the same from Jesus. Do you realize in Matthew 15:24, on this same story, that Matthew says, only the children? Not that he will feed the children first. If you knew all that, why are you going to Jesus? If you're a Greek, if you're a Gentile, why are you going to Jesus? He only likes the Israelites. And Jesus lifts this Gentile woman up and says, this is the kind of faith I'm looking for. Lord, teach us to pray. Suppose one of you have a friend and should go to him at midnight. Don't bother me, the door is shut. My children are in bed and I cannot get up. and give you anything. You see, temptation is crouching near us. We are tempted to leave, to become angry with God, to lose heart. Listen again to the Gentile woman. She began to cry out, "Have mercy on me, O Lord." But Jesus did not answer her. The disciples said, "Send her away, she is shouting." When Jesus did answer, it sounded more like a lesson on prayer, didn't it? Don't bother me and my children. But the woman would not be denied, nor would the friend who kept pounding on the door, much like the widow, and both had faith, get this, in a person. The woman gave this reply to Jesus: "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs feed on the crumbs which fall from the master's table." And Jesus answered and said to her, "O woman, your faith is great. Be it done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed at once. Round one, ready, wrestle. We read what made the judge give in. Yet because this widow bothers me. Round two, Luke 11. Yet because of his persistence, he will get up and give him as much as he needs. Do you know what I wrestled with? Whether I should even get into these two parables. I don't know how to put a nice little bow around this message. I have brought up some troubling thoughts about God and prayer, and it sounds like he tends to be exclusive, likes his rest, comes across as grumpy, shuts the door, even friends' requests bother him. His own children are the only ones allowed in the house late at night. He purposely delays the answer, and it only comes after persistence. Like I said, we like sermons with formulas and nice little packages, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's all you do, and this is how you get a result. The judge, the friend behind the door, and Jesus all had a mind and ability to reason. You see, they all could change their mind. God has not locked the future. There are still choices that can be made, and prayer is the key. Our prayers are received by our Father, who is hallowed in heaven. And Jesus ends his lesson on prayer by reminding them that the Father knows how to give good gifts. Just because we ask for what looks like a fish, but instead is a snake, our Father will not give us the snake. He knows what is good for us. He is a mind, or better stated, a personality that receives our prayers, looking deeply within and trying to find our heart. So what is prayer? It ought to begin with our Father. It is a conversation with a person, not a force, not a formula, a person. We're back to that wrestling match that we often want to avoid, but must be willing to participate. Sometimes it comes across like talking to an angry judge who doesn't care about us. And sometimes it's more like a friend who has helped us in the past, but now doesn't want to get out of bed. Sometimes It is like the two blind men who others are upset that they're even praying. And sometimes it's like a woman who touched the hem and was healed. Sometimes it's like Paul, who Satan placed a thorn in his life and it was not removed. And sometimes it's like Jacob, who limped for the rest of his life after wrestling with the angel of God. And sometimes it's like the garden, where there is silence and the angels come to minister but do not change the situation. But prayer is connected to a real personality that does not want us to give up and lose heart. Prayer is connected to a relationship. Carolee, what are those two?
Pray without ceasing and never lose heart.
Never lose heart. Let's pray. Lord, this seems rather mechanical, praying without a congregation. But I'm thankful for Richard and Carolee who have come out. I'm thankful that we have this ability to communicate a sermon. I pray for our people. I pray for our nation. I pray for our world. There are many countries that closing a door does not solve the situation. I pray for our world, Lord. This is a time of reflection, a time of knowing that we have a real God who we can pray to, that is alive and well and wants to hear from us. I pray that we do not yield to temptation, but we yield our hearts to you. In thy precious name, amen. Amen.